Prime Minister Modi, why don't you take some questions from the freest press in the world?
Violence should never be accepted against peaceful protests.
Joining me now is the former US correspondent.
Mr. Gandhi was detained.
Democracies are often tested not during moments of stability, but during moments of public dissent.
It really didn't bother me, and it didn't really get to me.
And if this continues, I fear that we could lose someone like him. The true measure of a democracy is not how loudly its leaders speak, but how willingly they submit themselves to public scrutiny. Democracies are not sustained by elections alone, they're sustained by accountability, transparency, and unwavering commitment to truth. Perhaps nowhere is that principle tested more profoundly than when those entrusted with power are confronted by difficult, unscripted questions. Across India today, millions of young people have taken to the streets following the allegations of examination irregularities and paper leaks that they believe have jeopardized years of relentless discipline, sacrifice, and aspiration. Numerous videos online have also shown confrontations between the police and the demonstrators, with allegations of excessive force in some instances. Amid this broader national conversation surrounding democratic accountability and press freedom, one journalist found herself at the center of international attention, not because she delivered an impassioned speech, but because she posed a single straightforward question. It is therefore a genuine privilege for me to now welcome the journalist behind that moment. Joining me now is the former US correspondent and now the commentator in the Norwegian newspaper, Dagsavisen. I hope I pronounced that properly.
Yeah, very well. Thank you so much for having me. Very nice to be able to talk to you.
So it was back in May that I started following your work, and I'd like to take you back to that defining moment in May as you stood there preparing to ask the Prime Minister your question. And I'm curious to know what was going through your mind.
So, to me, I think it's probably a little bit disappointing because I didn't see it as such a big part of my it was a big part of the event itself was of course the biggest part of my workday, but that moment to me wasn't really something that I spent a lot of time like kind of analyzing beforehand. Afterhand definitely, but not beforehand, because to me, when you invite the press and there's no questions, it's still our job to also try to challenge that narrative. So to me, when I did in the minutes before, I listened to both the Prime Minister speak, and when they were done, I knew that I had to find the most appropriate time to try to raise my voice and ask a question. And I also knew that I wouldn't have well with time because the Prime Minister of India would likely, as he also did, exit that room quite quickly because it was a small room. So this is very interesting also because you saw in Australia, the Prime Minister now is even further away from the press than the Norway incident. And I speculate whether that's because he wants to distance himself even further now, or just because the prime minister's the office that he or the press room that he chose to use, it could have also just been a choice of his that made the prime minister more closer to the press than maybe what he would like us to be. But that's also what made it possible to some extent that we were that close. It is also probably what made it more powerful to some a part of the Indian population, just because you could see that we were not that far away. But yeah, to answer your question, what really went through my mind was just to make sure I was trying at the most suitable
Yes,
time.
100%. India ranks at 157th when it comes to press freedom, which is terrible. And it's profoundly troubling, which actually leads to my next question. And that is, in the aftermath of that exchange, your question was applauded by millions, yet it also drew criticism from several prominent media personalities. And were you surprised by the intensity of those reactions?
I don't think I definitely wasn't well enough prepared. I have someone actually working in the office next to me, which also she's a journalist too, and she has a lot of knowledge about India and Pakistan. And she told me some of these networks you probably shouldn't go on. But I really wanted to try to answer every critical question. Yeah, she really did warn me. But I did want to, at that time, I was very also, because it's one of those things where you talk about press freedom and accountability, I also wanted to show that I'm subject to that too, you know, that since now I'm the one being criticized for the way I conducted my profession, I wanted to show that I could answer questions regarding that. But then also in particularly the interview with NDTV, I got so many questions that were not really relevant to the
They tried to have a
topic.
gotcha moment. They attempted to engineer a gotcha moment, but failed spectacularly. It was evident that public sentiment was firmly on your side, with countless young people resonating with your message. And you have indeed become a very popular international journalist now in India, if not the most
Some
popular.
people will argue that they basically just destroyed me and the narrative, and others will say that it was unfair. But to me, for example, one of the questions that I didn't really appreciate, which is okay too. Like I get that interview objects will also not appreciate my question. So, but I can speak on it at least and say that they asked me about the party press of Norway back in the days, in the 90s, 80s, 70s. And I just had to try to explain them that was back in the days. It's not like that now. And I wasn't born. So if you want to try to challenge that, the way things were in Norway back in the days, I think you should probably try to speak to someone that was more a part of that structure, you know? And they also brought up people that aren't here with us anymore, which I thought was a little bit untasteful, given what was supposed to be the subject of the interview. So that I didn't approve of that much, but it is what it
It
is.
is what it is. The oldest tactic in the book. When they cannot engage with your arguments on their merits, they retreat at homonyms and red herrings.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, specifically young people resonated with both your message and your approach. It reflects a broader shift, and many no longer place the same trust in the mainstream media, and I don't think they like them or find it as compelling as they once did. And of course, I wouldn't want to
But also, I
generalize.
will say that, like, I was interviewed by so many great media channels, also more independently, but also like Laundry, Peak TV, and they also had critical questions for me, politics, and I appreciated that too, because I think critical questions do make the conversation better. Especially in a heated moment like that, because I also do get the chance to then answer to the critics. So I really appreciated that type too. The Telegraph the other day too had an interview with me, and that was just critical questions of how I decided to conduct my online presence right now. And I said, "Oh, this is great. I answer both the critics and probably some of the bots too. It works."
Absolutely. Anyway, moving away from negativity and towards something far more encouraging, we've witnessed millions of Indians, specifically students and youngsters, resonate with your message, as I mentioned in my monologue, and many feel a stronger connection with independent voices and with sections of mainstream media whom they believe have failed to represent public concerns effectively.
Yes.
So, for the benefit of our international audience, because we may have international viewers when I upload the video, it's worth briefly explaining why the NEET paper leak, sparked such widespread protests. So every year, millions of students dedicate years of their lives preparing for NEET examination, often sacrificing sleep, social lives, and financial stability in pursuit of a single opportunity to study medicine. When allegations of paper leaks emerge, the repercussions extend far beyond one examination. Honest students begin questioning whether merit still prevails. Public confidence in one of the nation's most consequential examinations is profoundly undermined. Which leads to my next question, which is from your perspective as a journalist, what do these nationwide student demonstrations reveal about the relationships between India's younger generation and its public institutions?
I think that's a great question, but I do think that one of the main takeaways that I would have if I was in government right now, it is that this new generation demands a lot more accountability So that's also something you got to think about if you want to win elections further on, that actually this younger generations have a much higher standard. They're much more globalized as well, so they see how it works in other countries, and they want to pursue different measures of accountability in India as well. So I think that's the demand for accountability should not be overseen right now. And it's a difference between talking about accountability and also having your actions match that. So I've seen the recent tweet or X post or social post press messages from both education minister and well, I don't remember who the other one was, but and he mentions accountability, and I also saw of course, the prime minister's kind of, I guess he mentioned it, but it wasn't a complete statement, and they talk about it being a national responsibility and that it's important to hold government accountable. So then the question will actually be in probably already the upcoming days, because this protest isn't seeming to go anywhere. So then the question will actually be, what will be the accountability here? And then you see yesterday, which I thought was quite, those pictures were astonishing, that Mr. Gandhi was detained.
Yes, he belongs to the opposition party, and I believe that
Yes.
he's a lot more popular among India's youth. In my view, he's far more influential with younger audiences than many of his contemporaries, which I believe partly explains why he was treated the way he
It
was.
was very clever of him also, just as a politician, to really just tackle this, that he went out there, he showed his support, but you can't ignore, and I don't think the international community should ignore the message that it sent to detain him, because when you detain an oppositional leader, especially him in India, that's not just detaining him, it's kind of also sending a message to all of his followers. So it's something very, it's symbolic in a sense that's really not productive. But yeah, it was I saw those photos and I really reacted to them, but I think I saw that he was also released quite quickly.
This is utilizing democracy in the right manner. So, democracies are often tested not during moments of stability, but during moments of public dissent. And I've seen your posts about the police brutality during the protests in India, and in several videos, officers appear to be using force against students, and many seem particularly vulnerable. Some of those involved were reportedly in plain clothes rather than standard police uniforms. So, what do you make of that? What do you make of the use of force in these situations, and how do you view the role of officers operating in plain clothes during the
I
protests?
think violence should never be accepted against peaceful protests. And there's, of course, for me, it's very difficult because I see these competing narratives online. Some say the protesters started the violence, others say it was the police. So I have to look for the reporters on ground that I trust to tell me what they see, which is the
So,
one.
historically, the police in India have often treated protesting students in an inhumane manner, and this has happened repeatedly. But anyway, moving on from this, another story that captured widespread attention, including that of international journalists like yourself, is the hunger strike of Sonam Wangchuk, the engineer, education reformer, innovator, and Raman Magsaysay Award laureate. So, in my view, his decision is profoundly altruistic because he has nothing to gain from this. He's doing it to draw attention to all the protests that are going on. And if this continues, I fear that we could lose someone like him. So, what do you make of the hunger strike and the remarkably slow and dull response from the authorities?
It's difficult to say, because the government did decide to bring him to a hospital. So the thing about so it's, and of course his wife also got involved and was very kind of strict with what she would not want them to do, or to interrupt the hunger strike basically. But I think it's just going around the actual issue right now. The actual issue is, of course, why he's on a hunger strike. So the government should just address that instead. And I also said this previously, that if the government does not want to fire the minister, which is the demand from the protesters, then why not explain it and, you know,
Just
make
be
it,
accountable.
yes,
Yeah,
and
explaining it.
defend your decision.
I know you're busy, and I'm sure you have many more interviews to attend, so I'll leave you with one final question,
Of course.
which is, if a young journalist is watching this and aspires to ask difficult questions but fears criticism, intimidation, or professional repercussions, what advice would you offer them? That's my final question.
I think it's just important to be able to. I think journalism today will be scrutinized in the future years as well, just because that's the digital media system. So your work is subject to much more scrutiny than earlier. But I think one thing I learned from the online hate in May was that I'm glad I'm older in this profession and that I've done this for a few years, but it really didn't bother me and it didn't really get to me. So I think you kind of get a little bit like you don't see that as much. I think as long as you stand by your values and your integrity, and it would get to me a much worse if it was my parents or my brother or my friends that said these things about me, so I think it's just about putting value to the people that matter and their opinion, and choosing to not be emotionally attached to some bots online opinion, or even other people. But of course, critical or opinions that are critical of me but are constructive are always welcomed, and that's also a part of journalism. It's both ways.
Right. Okay, Helle Lyng, brilliant. That was a very good last answer, and I'm pretty sure our audience will be left with a lot to reflect upon. So thank you so much for taking time
I'm
and joining
looking
my
forward
show.
to following your work, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you again. See you.
Goodbye.